So we kind of brushed up on this in the preview video in the beginning of it. Ricky Fowler won in a playoff. I didn't say the playoff part, but he did win in a playoff against Colin Morikawa and Adam Hadwin. Ricky had to birdie the last hole in regulation. Let's call it that way, like this is a real sports event. I mean, it is a real sports event, but like basketball or anything with a shot clock or a clock. Ricky wins because he also birdies the playoff hole. It was amazing. By the way, for those that are wondering, what was Ricky Fowler's ownership? Was it even close to anyone else's? Let me just go ahead and put this filter on and go sort by ownership. Minus Cody Gribble, who wasn't even in DraftKings. We can go ahead and just get that out. Oh, wow. Whoa. Ricky Fowler's 35%, the most owned golfer in or for the Rock Emerge Classic, won the event. By the way, he was also in the optimal lineup. You can see all the colors up there. Optimal, GPP, and SweetSpot Optimal. Oof. Bad day for the game theory bros. Now I understand. Well, look at all the other guys down here. Yeah, I mean, there's question marks with a lot of those guys, right? That's fine. But 35%, people are just like, no, not at 35. That's crazy. If you're gonna have leverage over this, you're gonna have to own them in 70% of your lineups. Well, there you go. This was 1 week. Don't get me wrong. I understand this is 1 week, but it still proves the optimal lineup does not care about projected ownership. It never cares about projected ownership at all. I have a video on it. It explains it. That's my 2 cents. I'm not going to go further into it. But that's kind of I'm just going to keep it a quick wrap up of the Rock Emerge Classic because I just want to go over the SweetSpot process to show you how well it did. When it comes to evaluating how well the SweetSpot process did, I come to the bucket system page after I've updated the spreadsheets to show you how many buckets were successful. Now, basically, to create a Y in this column for the success, we first have to look at how many golfers finished inside the top 10 from those buckets. So we basically just obviously kind of not cross-platform, but do our, I forget what this terminology is, but just take the last year one bucket. We see how many golfers finished inside the top 10, and we look at the projections that I had earlier. So you can see we always round down with the minimum. We always round up with the maximum. The maximum goes to 2, which automatically means the minimum goes to 0. Although if you were to round down, 1.01 would round on to 1. But we want a 2-point buffer. So 0 to 2 was the projection. 2 finished inside the top 10. 1 was in the optimal lineup. 1 was also in the SweetSpot Optimal, which means that bucket was successful. Now, if you do that and you look at all the projections for each bucket versus how many finished inside the top 10, by the way, if the top 10 number, like let's say this one right here, you see how this is a 6, but the projection was 1 to 3? If this number falls outside the range, then we look at how many golfers finish inside the optimal. And if the optimal finishes inside that range, then it's a yes. So it's first looking at top 10s, then it's looking at optimal lineups. It ignores SweetSpot Optimal. So when I scroll through this, I mean, you only need to see 6 more buckets to see how well it did. We have 100% success rate. 100% success rate when it comes to the bucket system last week. That means all the projections that I had for the buckets were 100% correct. Meaning, if you just went into the cheat sheet, filtered out by each bucket, you could see all the golfers that were included in them. Like, for instance, there were 14 golfers in the last year one bucket. 14. I'm telling you, you want somewhere between 0 to 2. So at most, you only pick 2, but maybe you only want 1. That eliminates 13 golfers from your player pool. Just easy, simple. And maybe you wanted 2. That would have been fine. Then you put 2 in your lineup because there were 2 that did finish inside the top 10. But just say you wanted 1. Perfect. Again, you eliminated 3. There were 13 golfers in this bucket. You only wanted 1, so you eliminate 12 others. And it just goes from there. That's how beautiful this process is, because it eliminates golfers from your player pool that obviously either make sense to you or that follow a model or one thing or the other. And that's why I do it by the buckets. I always do it this way. Now, that's not the only piece that goes into the SweetSpot process. The other thing that goes into it are the Marquee Tee Times. So if I were to look at the Marquee Tee Times, basically what I do is I sort from this group rank A to Z, scroll on up, and these were the top 10 groups or the top 9 groups in the Rocket Mortgage Classic. So I'm looking at all 3 of the golfers that are in the group. I'm looking at their SweetSpot ranks. I'm adding their ranks all together, and the lowest, it's rank ordered by the lowest. The lowest total score for each group, that is how I determine who are the best groups at the Rocket Mortgage Classic. Now, the rule that comes with this, I explain it every single strategy video with the Marquee Tee Times, is you want to select 2 to 4 groups and only 1 golfer from each of those groups you want to put in your lineup. So to repeat that, 2 to 4 groups, and only select 1 golfer from each of those groups. So another way to say it too is you want to select 2 to 4 golfers and you don't want them paired up together. Well, what do we see here? Now, these little black tick marks, by the way, are optimal lineup golfers. So that's the one thing I want to look at. I know I haven't really talked about the optimal lineup yet. I will get there. Collin Morikawa was in the optimal lineup. He finished 2nd. Taylor Moore was in the optimal lineup. He finished 4th. Adam Hadwin was in the optimal lineup. He finished 2nd. Ricky Fowler was in the optimal lineup. He finished 1st. That's 4 golfers, by the way, 4 golfers that were in the optimal lineup. If you look at each one of their groups that they were in, you can just see the number over here in the group ranks. They didn't play together. Neither one of them played together. Morikawa was in group 2, Moore was in group 3, Hadwin was in group 4, and Fowler was in group 5. Didn't play together, 2 to 4. Check that one off the list too. That's another success for the bucket system. That means 100% success rate. 100% success rate. If one of these things didn't really match up, then I would look to see what the SweetSpot Optimal did against the Optimal. But I'm just going to save you the time. The SweetSpot Optimal was the Optimal. Believe it or not. The exact same lineup for the Optimal lineup was the SweetSpot Optimal. So you could have built this lineup following the SweetSpot process. And your optimal lineup was Ricky Fowler, Collin Morikawa, Adam Hadwin, Taylor Moore, Lucas Glover, and Peter Quest. Now, this doesn't really use 2 substitutions. I understand that. If I were to pull up the optimizer, let me find it. If I pull up the optimizer, I will show you how it works with the buckets, like the rules that are in the buckets. So if I zoom in, let's zoom out just a little bit. Okay. So we're looking at all the buckets, right? And especially when it comes to the salaries, this follows all the projections that I had last week. You know, we want somewhere between 0 to 2 low 6Ks and 0 to 1 low 6Ks, 0 to 2 high 6Ks. But I don't want to select more than 2 6K golfers. Then it's 1 to 3 7s, 0 to 2 8s, 0 to 2 9s, and 1 to 3 10Ks, which, believe it or not, said you wanted a 10K golfer. So if you're one of those that, you know, galaxy brained yourself with saying, no, I don't like any of the 10K golfers this week, or I don't want them because they're going to be too popular, well, you missed out because 2 10K golfers were in the optimal lineup. So when we look at the bucket projections, yeah, the 2 substitutions don't really work out. Now, this isn't a completed optimizer. This is just when I try to figure out what the optimal lineup is and the SweetSpot Optimal. So that's how you can get there. Because if you remember me talking about this in the optimal versus the GPP winning lineups, that segment of the preview video, I was talking about how you want to start with a 10K golfer, a 9K, an 8K, 2 7Ks, and then a 6K. That's where you want to start. And I always refer to it as the 10, 9, 8, 7, 7, 6 start. You get 2 substitutions from there. Well, I mean, okay, so we have one 10K golfer. That's wonderful. You can see we don't have a 9K golfer. So we actually substitute one of those. Actually, I just galaxy brained myself. You did make 2 substitutions. We don't have a 9K golfer. We sub that 9K golfer up to a 10K golfer. So now we get our 2 10Ks. There's our 8K. Hey, there's our one 7K. We need another 7K, but we can make one more substitution We moved that one 7K down to a 6K, and there you go. I just galaxy brained myself. So it all works out. You make your 2 substitutions. Obviously, it's still, again, the sweet spot optimal was the optimal. It's 100% success. I mean, it's 100% without even having to make any excuses. It just hit. I did not hit the optimal lineup. I was too infatuated with the 7K range and trying to figure out patterns and trends to select my 7K golfer. Let me explain really quickly what I did. So basically, I've been doing this every single week to try to figure out, you know, because the 7K range is what I like to deem as the glue that holds the 10K and the 6K range together. Because you do want a 10K golfer most of the time, and you do want a 6K golfer most of the time. So I just did this. I went to salaries, and I just looked at the 7K range. And oh, I should say this. I went back every single year. So I'm going through 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, looking at all the 7K golfers. I'm doing this exact same thing, trying to figure out what was the most common trend. And this is what I found out. You sort by recent form average. And what ended up happening more often than not were golfers that were in this range right here. Actually, it was not this range. I am so sorry. This range didn't show anything. It was this range in orange. You see all these orange numbers here. And I saw between, I think it was recent form 43 to recent form 58. So like this range right here, you wanted one golfer in this range in your lineup all the time. Not all the time, but most of the time. So that's kind of what I kind of did as a check when it came to building lineups, is I wanted one golfer from there. Well, look at this. Adam Schenk was down here, still in the orange, still, you know, well, he was part of the GPP win lineup. He was inside the top 10. And then you also had Aaron Rye. So I missed out on those guys because I was very specific with my range. So that's what kind of screwed me. I did have Aaron Rye a few times in my lineups, and I also had Adam Schenk, but it wasn't nearly enough because I kind of kicked him out. The other range was this, where you see the red numbers here. You know, usually this is a recent form range you want to stay away from, but I had identified it was a range you actually wanted to choose from when it came to building your lineups. Now, I was stuck on this. 66% cut made percentage, so this column right here. Anything that was over 60%, so like, let me do it a different way. Taylor Pendrith was one, Will Gordon was another, and Akshay Bhatia was the other one. Those 3 golfers I made sure were in 70% of my lineups. Akshay was in 40% of those lineups, actually. So Akshay missed the cut. And I was a fool for, I mean, I thought it was a prime golf course for him to do. The guy, not super good with putting, which I kind of had heard on some of the other podcasts last week, but just ignorantly ignored it. I didn't care. And it still wouldn't have affected me. When I think back on it, what I wish I would have done, I was kind of a sucker for D-Tree, and most of you guys know that I kind of have a superstition with playing the same price tag, like the golfer with the same price tag. So if I go to, you can see D-Tree up here at $7,400. That made me not want to play Pendrith that much more. I was like, oh, this is perfect. I'll just do D-Tree and Akshay. Now, it wasn't in all of my lineups. Like I said, Akshay was in about 40%. Pendrith were in some good lineups. And Pendrith, by the way, was in 3rd place heading into Sunday. One of those lineups was doing really well. I think I was making $150, and I put in $96 this last week. It's making me $150, the one that had Taylor in it, because it also had Taylor Moore. It had the 2 Taylors in it. And Taylor was, or Moore down here, by the way, was one of those forgettable ones, because he's kind of in a recent form average all to himself. But he's also in a good bucket with the last year's 6 bucket. Him and Pendrith, they both were in good buckets that I could have just used instead of looking at the recent form buckets and trying to figure out 7Ks and stuff like that with patterns, but I chose not to. So yeah, it was interesting. This was the first week that my 7K analysis didn't pan out. Funny to say that because CT Pan was up here that I really liked. Thankfully, I only had them in 6 of my lineups, and I think I built 184 lineups, so it didn't really hurt me. I didn't look back to see how good those lineups were, but yeah, I just said didn't pan out, and that reminded me of CT Pan. So yeah, I was more, I looked at the 7K range maybe a little too much this last week. And that's what kind of lost it for me. If I would have just stuck to the buckets, because Ricky Fowler and Ludwig Aberg were my top dudes that I wanted to play. And I don't think even Aberg, obviously, he shot really well his first round and then kind of fell off. He did score 88 points, which wasn't terrible. But anyways, I wanted to start a lot of my lineups with Ricky and Aberg and then go from there. I think Cam Davis was in a lot of my lineups too, and he scored pretty good. So yeah, starting someone like Fowler, Cam Davis would have been great for me. That obviously wasn't the optimal lineup. Hey man, we live and we learn, right? So I'm not going to go further into that. I know that was kind of, I don't know, just me addressing the issues with my lineup process. But yeah, the sweet spot process, 100% successful. Could have got you on the optimal lineup because that was what the sweet spot optimal was. It was all good.